Alrighty, well, good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Savina Chacheva. I'm the program director at the Cancer Wellness Center. For those of you new to the Cancer Wellness Center and those who've come from our partners at Northwest Community Healthcare, I'd like to welcome you. We're a nonprofit organization that aims to improve the emotional and physical well-being of those impacted by cancer through education, wellness, and support. Everything that we offer at the center is free. And if you would like to participate or learn more about the center, you can visit cancerwellness.org, and I'll put that in the chat here for you. Now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Michelle Matero, my colleague, who will talk today about coping with anxiety and depression. Welcome, Michelle.
Great. Thank you, Sabina. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Michelle Matero. I'm a clinical associate at Cancer Wellness Center, and I'm also the bereavement services coordinator. Anxiety and depression is certainly in my wheelhouse of many things that I enjoy speaking about. So again, thank you for being here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. Okay, that looks okay, Sabina? Okay, perfect. All right, so before we even jump in, I'm gonna go over an agenda, but I want to preface with saying, there's a lot that comes into play when we're talking about depression and anxiety. So this is very much so an overview, talking about what it looks like, how it presents itself a little bit, and then more importantly, how we can cope with those symptoms and a lot of the thoughts, the feelings that are associated with it. But by no means is this going to be an extensive review. Okay, so we'll talk about what is anxiety and depression, managing anxiety and depressive symptoms, how to challenge negative or unhelpful thinking habits, how to tolerate uncertainty, and then a little bit about managing stress and practicing self-compassion. Okay, so when we're talking about anxiety, anxiety isn't stress. It's our mind and body's response to stressful, dangerous, or unfamiliar situations. And what it does is it manifests itself as intense, excessive, persistent worry or fear, right? That might sound familiar to some of you. Fear, worry, and anxiety, these are normal human emotions. They're very often adaptive. They're meant to keep us safe. But usually that fear, that anxiety will reduce once that threat or that danger passes, right? But sometimes it doesn't. And that can make it really hard to feel safe. And that's when we notice an impact to our daily life and functioning. The stress response. So some of these might sound familiar, and we're not going to go too deep into any of them, but they're helpful just to think about our nervous system states as we're responding to stress, right? Experiencing anxiety. We have fight or flight. That's when we're perceiving danger, right? There's a threat there. Freeze, that's a response of the parasympathetic system where we feel immobilized. And where we want to be is it's called ventral vagal state. And that's our state of safety, of homeostasis, right? That's when we're feeling the most calm, the most peaceful, and that's what we aim for. Those other two, though, are major responses to stress. So what happens when fear or those perceived threats persist? We end up noticing this never-ending cycle, right, of worry, of anxiety. And for many of you here today, having experienced a cancer diagnosis, that was a very real threat, right? And it's hard after something happens like that. Your brain can be so on high alert, right? So anytime something might mimic that threat, your brain's responding in the same way. And what happens is then we see this cycle, right? Our thoughts create feelings, our feelings that create the behavior, and then behavior reinforces that thought. And this cycle here can work for us, but when we're experiencing worry and anxiety, we can notice how it works against us, right? We all of a sudden have a thought, it creates that feeling, and then that behavior, right? Is it fight, flight, freeze? And then looking a little bit at depression here. So depression is also known as major depressive disorder. It's a mood disorder, right? It makes you feel really sad, experiencing a lack of interest in life, things that you previously enjoyed. Most people will feel sad or depressed at times, right? It's a normal reaction to loss or to really difficult challenges in life. But when it's intense, when it persists, right, those feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, worthlessness, that can keep you from living your life, right? And that's when we would want to look at it being as something more than sadness. And I will make a note too of um, when to think about seeking professional help, right? Because we'll all experience anxious feelings or intense sadness at times, but it's really important when we need professional help. And there's going to be many factors that play a role in depression, and therefore there's different ways of treating it, of alleviating some of those symptoms depending on the specific person. So we'll go over a lot of different ways of doing so. You might find that not all pertain to you, but hopefully some stand out as something that might be able to help. Stay connected and ask for help, right? Getting support, staying connected is vital in overcoming depressive symptoms. It can be really hard to maintain a healthy perspective and sustain that effort that's required to alleviate those depressive symptoms on your own, right? So, exploring what your support network looks like, reaching out, maybe seeking out a support group, right? Talking to somebody, asking for help. Do things that make you feel good. It's important to know not only what energizes you, but also what relaxes you. So, maintaining a healthy lifestyle, better managing stress, setting limits, scheduling some fun into your day can all be ways, right, of doing what makes you feel good. Because as soon as we get that positive reinforcement, we're more likely to continue doing it. Practice good sleep hygiene. And this can be really hard because many times symptoms of depression are going to involve sleep disturbances, right? Whether you're sleeping too much or too little, and that will absolutely have a direct impact on your mood. Um, so, there's going to be a lot of information tonight, but just taking in bits and pieces and seeing maybe this is an area that I can assess a little bit more, where I can make improvements, right? Thinking, am I getting too much sleep? Am I not getting enough? How can I maybe practice some good sleep hygiene? Managing stress. So, not only can stress prolong and worsen depression, but it can also trigger it, right? And very often, when we start to introduce some of these stress reduction techniques, it's when things have gotten a little out of control for us, right? Or we're already noticing these symptoms that are not helpful or healthy. So it's always a good time, even when things are going okay, to just be exploring areas of your life that might be causing some stress. Thinking, how can I regain some control of this? How can I alleviate some of the pressure? Relaxation techniques. Daily practice of relaxation can really relieve a lot of symptoms of depression, reduce stress, and boost those good feelings of joy, of well being. Certainly at Cancer Wellness Center, we have a lot of different offerings that would fall into these relaxation practices. Yoga. Um, I have a stress reduction class that meets weekly on Tuesdays, where we do different deep breathing techniques, progressive muscle relaxation, and guided imagery and meditations. Finding ways of how you can incorporate that into your everyday life and really um, practicing at it, because it takes time to get used to it, to adapt to it, and then to also really stay consistent. Exercise and eat well. We know that movement and exercise is so good for our minds and bodies, and aiming for at least 15 minutes a day can really alleviate depressive symptoms. It boosts our mood. Similarly, if you can, I think that's on the next one about sunshine, but uh, what we eat has a direct impact on how we feel. So reducing foods that can adversely affect our brain and mood, thinking about caffeine, alcohol, trans fat, foods with high levels of preservatives or hormones. And again, we're not going to be able to take all of this on at once, but just kind of keeping this information in mind and seeing what changes might be realistic for you. Get some sunshine. This is the one I was going to mention when I'm talking about exercise. There's a lot of research about sunlight and boosting serotonin levels. A lot of it does say that most importantly, if you can try within like 30 minutes to an hour from waking up. That said, the sun has to be out, right? But hopefully we'll be getting more and more of that. But whenever possible, if you can get outside and expose yourself to sun for 10, 15 minutes, I think, we might not know that there's actual chemical level impact going on, but many times we can probably notice, right, that we just feel better when we get some sunshine. And this is one that I'll be dissecting a little bit more here. So this is assessing your negative thinking habits. And the reason that I go into a lot more detail with this one is because negative and unhelpful thinking patterns contribute to anxiety and depression, right? Those are often very comorbid experiences. So assessing and addressing your thinking habits can be perpetuating these symptoms. So by taking a look at them and seeing how can I improve this, you'll be able to live a much more peaceful and stress-free life. So briefly, I'm going to talk about cognitive distortions. And this was something where I've actually done a 6-part series on stress and anxiety, where we had a whole session just dedicated to these. But a cognitive distortion, it's faulty or inaccurate thinking, perception, or belief. It's when we're interpreting events in a way that's usually negatively biased, right? So sometimes it's just a momentary glitch, right? We will have a thought that kind of comes in and it's a little faulty, an inaccurate belief or perception. But over time, when that becomes more and more frequent, it actually seeps into being a pattern of thinking, right? A habit. That's when it might start interfering with our daily life, our relationships. It might lead or exacerbate existing anxiety, depression, behavioral problems. And the good news is, it's not our fault when these first kind of come into play. Again, as always, when we're dealing with challenging life events, just like that stress response, our brain is just trying to protect us. It's trying to do what it thinks is the most helpful. And there's research that's supporting that we develop some of these habits as a way of coping. However, the more prolonged or severe those events become, it's more likely that more of these cognitive distortions might form. And while they might serve us in the immediate moment, right? And I think so often too, if you think about dealing with something like a cancer diagnosis, a lot of people talk about like autopilot, right? And it really is a means of survival. So that's where your brain goes. And it might be helpful, it might serve a purpose in that immediate moment. But then over time, they're not rational, they're not healthy long term. And that's when we start to notice I'm feeling more anxious than usual, right? Or I'm feeling really down about these heavy thoughts I'm having. I'm falling into a negative cycle. And that's your cue, right? That's why everybody's here. It's thinking, what can I do now? I'm noticing that this isn't going to be good for me in the long term. So I'm wanting to address it. So a quick overview on some of these. So the cognitive distortions, right? They're the negative, unrealistic ways of thinking, and they fuel depression and anxiety. So here are a few. This doesn't go again into great detail, but if anybody is interested, we will have another round of the anxiety and stress management series, hopefully soon. And we have, again, a whole session dedicated to this. But all or nothing thinking, also sometimes referred to as black or white thinking, it's not seeing any middle ground, right? I see no gray area. It's one or the other. And that limited flexibility in the way we think can really hinder us, right? Overgeneralization. So having one single negative experience and then generalizing it to other things. A mental filter, that's ignoring positive events, focusing on the negative, right? When we notice that one thing that went wrong and not all the things that went right. Diminishing the positive. So that's thinking of different reasons why the positive events don't count, right? So we're discounting those positive ones. And again, these might be things that we all do from time and time and again, but good to think about which ones maybe seem like, oh, that's really me, right? That seems like a pattern that I tend to go to, right? That's my home away from home. Jumping to conclusions, right? Making negative interpretations without actual evidence. So subcategories of that one are fortune telling or mind reading, right? Sometimes thinking we can predict the future, right? Which we all know we can't, or you can't read other people's minds. Emotional reasoning. So that's believing the way that you feel reflects reality, right? And it can be hard sometimes because we can have a feeling, um, and then we try to justify a thought or how we want to make sense of how we're feeling. And sometimes a feeling is just a feeling. Shoulds and shoulds nots, right? Holding yourself to a strict list or standard, what you should and shouldn't be doing. And this rigidity makes it really hard, right? Again, for us to have that psychological flexibility to see the in between, and that's a really hard one, right? That one, those ought tos or musts, those kind of fall into that with the shoulds too. And then labeling, that's classifying yourself based on mistakes or perceived shortcomings, right? And those labels can hold a lot of weight, right? Instead of saying something like I messed up, but I'm a failure, right? A label, something like that can hold a lot more weight. Okay. So let's get into the good news, right? How can we challenge some of this, right? Worry can be useful, but at set times for set purposes. So you want to challenge your thoughts about worry, right? So this is focusing a little bit more specifically on that anxiety, right? And thinking about, do you have any unhelpful beliefs about the importance, the impact, the control of your worry? That's how worry often works, right? It needs things to fuel it. So sometimes it can lead you to have some of these beliefs about it, right? Like, I have to worry. Worry is what protects me, or worrying is what gives me some control over this situation, right? And really, what it is oftentimes just a false alarm going off in our brain, right? But we think that we need to tend to it. And having nothing to tend to leaves us to worry even more because there's no real action that we can be taking. Okay, so cognitive distancing, sometimes called cognitive diffusion, this is a strategy from acceptance and commitment therapy that I really like because it allows you to create some distance from your thoughts, from your feelings, right? Um, so trying to see those thoughts as guesses, not as facts, right? Again, your mind's trying to protect you by predicting what could happen. It wants to give you all of the worst case scenarios, all of the what ifs, to, and then it makes you think, I have to think all of these through. I have to be prepared, right? But what just because that we have a thought about something that could happen, it doesn't mean it will, right? Our thoughts don't have that power. Worry just tricks us in that way. So distancing, it works by it's separating yourself from your thoughts. It does it spatially, temporally, objectively, and hypothetically. So it's trying, and I put this image of clouds because it can be kind of like trying to view your thoughts as just moving data passing through your mind rather than the objective truth about a situation, right? Um, and when you can look at them that way, then you can choose whether or not to believe them or whether or not they hold that importance rather than just accepting them, right? This is looking at your thoughts, not from them. So sometimes, even having an anxious thought, think about how it appears in your mind, and then think about how you can provide a little bit of distance, even by just saying, instead of something bad is going to happen, is I'm having the thought that something bad is going to happen, right? Provides a little bit more room for you to take that step back, right? You're looking at your thoughts. And the same can be for feelings too. No thought, no feeling will last, right? So let's observe them. Let them come and let them go. Cognitive reframing, right? So this is looking at, are we looking at the glass half full or the glass half empty, right? Reframing is an emotional stimulus to change its impact. And it allows you then to change the underlying appraisals that we contribute to negative emotions, right? How else can I be looking at this situation, right? Is there any other way, thinking, reframing, or a new perspective, right? I don't have to accept it. I don't have to take it right away, but just thinking, is there another way, right? How might I look at this situation from a different perspective? Right? And this is a great image, and it's a saying that we all know, right? Thinking about the glass half empty or half full, but it really is powerful because it's showing you it's the same thing, but the way we see things, the appraisals that we make, these assumptions that we make, right, about the world and how it works, that's what makes all the difference. That's what can really change how we experience these emotions. Labeling your thoughts. So this is similar to thinking of that cognitive distancing or diffusion, right? Um, so watching your thinking, a lot of this is going to start with just that awareness, that's starting to catch yourself, right? If you're noticing you're criticizing yourself, right? Label it as criticizing, right? This can help separate you from that content of your thoughts and give you a little bit more awareness of the process, your mental processes, right? Again, it just allows a little bit of time for us to take a step back. Okay, tolerating uncertainty. This is a big one too, that a whole session can be spent on, right? Because um, we always live in uncertainty, but it doesn't mean that it's comfortable, and it doesn't mean that we've adapted a healthy way of being in the unknown, right? And I think, again, especially after diagnosis, there's going to be a level of uncertainty in a way that you never experienced it before, right? That it's in the forefront of your mind, or that your mind then wants to kind of trick you in thinking, but I know this to be certain, or I need to be certain about this. And really, when we live just seeking certainty, it's going to create more anxiety because we'll never get it, right? The world is full of unknown. And the more that we can learn to tolerate that, that's when we can really find peace, right? That those are the skills that are going to be able to transfer into every aspect of our lives. Um, and one way of coping with that uncertainty is challenging your need for it, right? Looking at the advantages and disadvantages of needing to be certain and how it affects you. Sometimes too, thinking about other areas in your life that you tolerate uncertainty, or how others do, because even if it feels unbearable at times, too hard to manage, to not know what's to come, to not know what's next, you can certainly find other areas in your life that you live with that uncertainty. It just can feel so hard in the moment to apply it to whatever it is that's consuming you right now, right? But looking at those other areas, you can learn, how am I tolerating it? And then another way is to learn to tolerate uncertainty, is reducing our need for it. So this is using this acronym called APPLE. And I'll break it down, but it's acknowledge, pause, pull back, let go, and explore. So let's take a look at that. So that awareness piece is so important with all of this when we're talking about anxiety, when we're talking about depressive symptoms. Noticing is the richest part of learning. So as soon as you can notice when that need for certainty comes up in your mind, you're at the first step, right? You're aware, you're acknowledging. Pause. Try not to react as you normally would, right? Normally, when that thought comes up that's saying, I need to be certain, I need to know, right? How do you normally react? Do we panic? Do we kind of spiral into these anxious thoughts? Do we get really down and isolate? Think about that. How do I normally react? Try not reacting at all and just pausing, just breathing, pulling back, telling yourself that this is the worry talking, right? This apparent need for certainty is not helpful and it's not necessary. Letting go of the thought or feeling about needing certainty, right? Telling yourself it's only a thought, it's only a feeling. We don't need to believe everything that we think, right? Thoughts are not statements of fact. They will pass, and we don't have to respond to each of them, right? It's okay that there's times that thoughts that we never had before enter our mind. And so often, then, when these come up, we can think that we need to be paying attention to them. There's a reason they're coming. And there might be, a triggering event that kind of cause new thoughts to enter, but it doesn't mean that they hold any more importance, or value in your life, right? And doing this allows you to take that step back and just evaluate it a little bit, right? And notice, is this just maybe that need for certainty coming into play, right? What's going on here for me? And then exploring the present moment, because right now, in this moment, you are okay, right? So noticing when that comes up, when that fear, that uncertainty, that your mind, your body isn't going to be able to differentiate between the real threat and the perceived threat. So by doing this, you can give yourself a moment, right? And say, you're okay, right? Notice your breathing. What's going on around you, right? Follow the sensations of your breath. Do a grounding technique, right? Noticing your five senses, something to just kind of pull you back. And what happens is over time, the more you practice these, we can rewire our brains. The more and more we do this, these are the habits that can come into play, just as we can fall into those negative thinking traps and unhealthy thinking patterns. We can rewire it and think in a whole different way. And I know sometimes when we're feeling depressed, when we're feeling anxious, it can really feel like there's no way out, or that I'm never going to think a different way, right? I'll always be kind of trapped in here. And it really can happen. We can do this for ourselves. Okay, another way is practicing stress reduction strategies. Mindfulness, right? Observing your thoughts rather than reacting to them. And I can say that over and over again, right? Of this like awareness. That's what mindfulness is. And observing. We're not reacting. We're not judging a thought for coming up the way it is. We're observing them. Self-care. How are you taking care of yourself? Right? Finding, again, those activities that soothe you, that relax you, ones that energize you. Finding thoughts that feel good. Asking yourself, is this thought helpful? Is this thought serving me? Right? Almost always in times of worry, when we're experiencing anxiety, that's something that can really kind of cue us in, right? Is this helpful? Because the times that we might need it, that we actually can have something to do, well, no, yes, okay, I need this, I need maybe some of this anxious energy to help me get this done or to do this. But more times than not, they're not helpful. They're not serving us. Taking it one day at a time, right? Focusing on this day, this hour, this moment, very much so aligned with practicing mindfulness, but really trying to slow down. A lot of the times we might notice that our thoughts are rooted in the past, right? Or they're future oriented. And that's again where we'll see some of that sadness, some of that anxiety. And really, the only moment that we ever have, right, is now, is the present. And the more that we can feel comfortable being in that moment, the more peace we'll be able to find. Because again, that anxiety longs for you to know what's to come. So it's thinking that you're going to be able to prepare for all of these what ifs in the future. But that future moment will at one time be the present, right? And having trust in your future self, that anything that might be worrying you or on your mind, trusting your self-efficacy, that in the future you'd be able to handle it, right? Just as you would when it's in the present moment, trust that you'd be able to take care of that, right? And worrying about it now, putting the energy, taking you away from the present moment, isn't going to help it then. There you go. Trust yourself, right? Trust the future efficacy of yourself. You can handle what arises. Learning to tolerate uncomfortable emotions gives us flexibility, right? Um, it's not something that we're really taught. It's, kind of even goes back to some of those cognitive distortions that very often we find comfort in having control, right? And seeing things as one way or another, when really being able to tolerate emotions, things that are uncomfortable, having that psychological flexibility serves us so much more, right? It allows us to be curious, to see other perspectives, um, that'll ultimately serve us, right? It'll help us be able to tackle whatever emotions and feelings and thoughts arise. Separating responsive from reactive, right? Thinking, am I reacting to this situation when I should be responding? And in this way, it's thinking that, right, a reaction is kind of like an impulse, where when we respond to something, we are able to take a step back, evaluate the situation a little bit better, um, to give us time to respond. Practicing self-compassion. So this is another piece too, um, of that I had a whole session on in that 6-part series, because this is often, a novel experience for a lot of people, right? We hear a lot about self-care, self-love, um, but really thinking about, is this something that I'm practicing, and how might practicing this help me feel better, right? So part of that is just acknowledging that you're struggling when you are, right? And that it's hard. Being curious about your anxiety or whatever it is that you're experiencing, right? Being with it, wanting to explore it a little bit more. Suspending judgment, remembering that you're doing the best you can. Treating yourself as you would a loved one, right? Who's in pain or who's facing challenges. I know that might be something too that you've heard before, but again, it's something to think about putting into practice and what that actually would look like, right? Um, we're usually our own worst critic, right? And are really hard on ourselves, and would treat others with a lot more compassion than we offer ourselves. And it can be uncomfortable at first. It can feel foreign. Practicing self compassion sometimes, people don't want that feeling of maybe it being selfish, of thinking of yourself. But think about how taking care of yourself in this way would impact how you see the world, your relationships, right? How you interact with others, and what this might be able to do for you. And then looking at these 3 parts of self compassion. So, this first part here is self kindness, right? Versus self judgment. So, opening up to your experience in the present moment, whether you're feeling happy, sad, anxious, and just acknowledge your experience, right? Common humanity versus isolation. And this is an important one, because I think when experiencing depressive symptoms, when experiencing anxiety, it can feel so isolating, right? It can feel like I'm the only one going through this, that I'm the only one that has these thoughts, that has these feelings, right? And even just being here together tonight shows we all have so much more in common, right? And suffering, having challenges in life, dealing with, taking care of our mental health, that's what can connect us, right? that's something, it's universal. We all experience this at times. And again, it's kind of part of what anxiety and depression can do, where it just tries to kind of keep you there because we get comfortable when it happens over time. And just remembering though that this is part of being human. It's what can connect us to others. Um, and then we can offer ourselves a little bit more compassion when we realize that. And then mindfulness. Again, there's a couple things, overarching things here, but versus over identifying, right? So again, observing those thoughts and feelings rather than identifying as them, and thinking about noticing the content of your thinking instead of taking your thoughts at face value, right? And even just practicing with how different that feels, right? Of thinking to yourself right now, something bad is going to happen, right? That doesn't feel good. Even if you weren't having that thought right now, saying it to yourself, right? It can absolutely stir up those emotions, where simply by trying to just shift it a little to observing that I'm having the thought that something bad is going to happen, gives us that space. We're observing it, we're noticing. We don't take it as fact, right? It gives us, again, a little bit of that degrees of separation. Okay, perfect. And so this last part here is just talking about when to seek professional help. We could all use help with this, right? This is, again, such a common experience, and there's help out there. So seek help, utilize the support that's around you and the resources. Um, we have many offerings at Cancer Wellness Center, and I think having somebody to talk to, utilizing even like support group resources, again, solidifies the idea that you're not alone in this, and that there are a lot of ways of changing the way that you feel, the way that you think, um, and we're here to help. I know that was a lot of information in 45 minutes, um, but I'd love to hear from some of you. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Let's see.
Thank you so much.